guys, welcome back to the next video in the Build a Spotify app series. In the last video, we started putting together the library UI with both of these child controllers and this nice toggle view up here. And in this video, we're going to actually work on creating a playlist, adding tracks to it and viewing our playlist. So if that all sounds good, make sure you start by liking this video down below, helps out quite a bit, opening up Xcode and jumping back into our workspace. So what do we actually need to do in regards to working with the playlist? Well, we're going to need to write out some API calls, and I actually opened up the documentation over here, and you can see that there are a number of API calls we can make for a playlist. Things like getting a list of the current users playlist, creating a playlist, adding tracks to a playlist, add items, just like that. So we're going to write out the API calls and we'll see how we do on time, and we might hook up the UI in this video as well. So let's open up the manager here and let's open up API callers, and let's find where we created our playlist mark, which is right here, which is get playlist details. We only have one function. We're going to add a few here. So I'm going to add a public func get current user playlists. Let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to copy and paste it a few times. The next one we're going to do is create playlist, and we'll say with name, just like that. Third one is going to be add track to playlist. We'll say add track to playlist, just like that. And this is going to be taking in a single audio track, pretty simple. And this last one, we could optionally allow the user to delete a playlist. I think there's an API endpoint for that. Let's see. So there is reordering items, adding items. We can get a playlist. You can upload. We can remove an item from a playlist. Looks like we can't actually delete a playlist, but we could remove an item from a playlist. This API right here, remove items from a playlist. So we'll create one function for that. So we'll say remove track from playlist, and this is going to be a track, taking in an audio track. And let's add the additional parameters that we need for this. So to get to a current user's playlist, we don't need to pass in any particular parameters, but we do want a completion block, which is going to be an escaping closure, giving us a result with an array of playlist objects, and an error if anything goes wrong. And this closure gives us void back, just like that. And whoops, we don't want to scroll down. The next one here, we want to create a playlist, and we just need a name, I believe, to create it. I don't think we really need anything else. And this is also going to give us a completion back. And this completion, instead of being something that gives us a results back, we could optionally just say, give me back a Boolean indicating, if the creation was successful or not. All right. This third one here, we're going to say add track to a playlist. So we want to have the track that we want to have added. And we also want to have the playlist to add to. So that'll be a second parameter. And then we want, I guess, a completion block here, which is going to tell us, if it succeeded. And we don't necessarily need to have an object come back here as a result either. So instead of a result, we're going to say this is a Boolean, giving us back void, just like that. And I'm going to start line breaking this stuff a little bit so it's a little cleaner to read. And let's go ahead and expand our curlies. And this one here down below, I guess is going to be the exact same thing. So I'm going to copy and paste the parameters. When you want to remove from a playlist, you're just going to say what audio track do you want to remove, which playlist are you removing from, and a completion. So let's go ahead and write out all these APIs. So this first one, we're going to do get current user playlist. We're going to first create a request. This is going to be a URL, which takes in a string. It's going to be constants.base API URL, appending on the path for the particular URL. I think it's going to be a get, I'm kind of guessing. And the completion we're going to add here. Let's go ahead and line break all this stuff. And from this function for create request, we get a request back. We're going to create a task and execute this request. So we'll say URL session. We're going to say shared. And we're going to say data task, and we want to find data task with a request and completion. So that first one has a request, but not a completion. We want this one right here. This parameter is a request. This one gives us back data, a HTTP response, which we're going to ignore. In the block here, we're going to unwrap said data. We are going to validate that the error is nil. We then want to go ahead and try to decode the data back. So I'm going to just get JSON and dump it into the console so we can see what we're getting. I think we should have the models already to serialize it, but let's just dump it out for the sake of just making sure that we're not kind of guessing there. So we're going to say print JSON in this case. We don't need our antivirus pop-up friend, so let's get rid of that. So let's see here, we're saying print JSON. We need a catch statement here. In case something goes wrong, we're going to print out the error. We'll say completion is going to be failure with said error. This guard should have a completion for the failure as well. So I'm going to say here, this is a failure with API error dot fail to get data. Pretty simple. And let's see, why is this yelling at me? So completion, this should be error. Don't know what that autocomplete's all about. Let's go ahead and call this now from the controller, but don't forget to say task.resume because that's slightly important. And let me go ahead and I actually never added the path here. So let's go back to our API documentation, and under the playlist API, we're going to say get a list of current user playlists. The path is me/playlists. So I'm going to copy that. And we are going to paste it in like that. Let's make sure we're not actually required to send any parameters. All right, let's see what's going on here. It wants an authorization, which makes sense. It has a limit, and the limit by default is, let's see, 20, and has a max of 50. So we can go ahead and increase this. All right, let's go ahead and say the limit is 50. And by default, we shouldn't actually get any playlist back because I have not created any for this account. But it looks like the response here gives us href and items. And each of these items, if I'm not mistaken, should be a playlist object. So I'm going to go into our models, and I think we have something that kind of looks like that model. So let's look at our featured playlist response. All right, let's see. So that's featured playlist response, and it has an array of playlists. That's not really helpful. All right, let's take a look at playlist details here. That's not helpful either. So what I'm going to do is let me just go ahead and create this as a standalone object. So we actually have something that's probably appropriately named. So I'll say new file here. It'll be a Swift file. And I'm going to call this library playlists response. Let's go ahead and create this here, which is simply going to be library playlists response. Make that plural, playlist response. It's going to be codable. And this is going to have a single item on here, items rather, which is an array of playlist objects. And I'm pretty sure it was plural. Let's just double check. It's items. And let's go ahead and call this from the controller, and let's see what we get. So we had put that controller in other under library, and it is library playlist controller. So in its viewed load, we can now say API caller shared, and we're going to say get current user playlists, and this will give us a result back. We're going to go ahead and switch on said results. In the success case, we actually want to hand back the playlists, which we have not done yet, but we will in a moment. And the failure case, we're going to get an error, and we will just print out said error for the time being. Go ahead and hit Command R to build and run. And what I'll also do, I guess, here is change the system pink to system background, since we don't really need pink anymore. And let's go to that last tab once it loads. Let's see what the response is here. So looking good. We have an href and items, but items is an empty array at the moment because we don't have any playlists. So let's go back to our API caller under managers. This project is starting to get pretty big. And we're going to say that this returns an array of playlists back, which we did already. But we can now decode instead of JSON directly. We can now say that results is going to be JSON decoder. We're going to decode out a library playlist response.self from the data. And we can pass back to the completion handler a success, with result.items. And if you take a look here, items is an array of playlist objects, just like that. So pretty cool. So what do we actually want to do with the items when we get it back? Well, if it's empty, I'm just going to show a label here saying no playlists, create now, or maybe create button or something. And if there are playlists, we're going to have a plus button in the top right corner here. And based on if you're on, playlists or not, you're going to go ahead and get an option to create. So pretty simple. So let's see how we want to actually go about doing that. So back in the library playlist controller, what we are going to do is we will put all of this stuff on the main thread in the closure here for this API call, because we're going to use stuff on the main thread. And we're also going to say weak self at the end of the function call here, so we don't actually use self and cause a retain cycle. We want to go ahead and hold on to playlists by saying playlists is playlists, just like that. We need to create playlists up here. So I'm going to say this is a var playlists, which is going to be an array of playlists. Pretty simple. And I guess the other thing that we'll do here is we'll say self.update UI. And I'm going to go and put this into its own function, because if we do have playlists, we probably want to list them out in something like a table view. So I'm going to say in here, if playlist is empty, we're going to show label. Otherwise, what we want to go ahead and do is show our table of actual playlists. So we're going to do show table. So let's see. So for this show label thing, what I'm going to go ahead and do is we are going to create a reusable view in the view folder that we can use. So I'm going to go ahead and open this up, and we're going to call this a Cocoa Touch class. It's going to be a UI view. And I guess I'll go ahead and call this a action view, or maybe a, I don't know, an alert view. Call it whatever you want. I'm just going to stick with action view. We'll call it action label view, so it's a little more clear. Now we want a label in here as well as a button. And that button is going to be, whatever we supply to it. So we're going to say initializer, super, we want to init with the given frame. We are also going to say clips to bound so we don't overflow. We want the required initializer. We're going to say fatal error in here. We're going to say layout subviews to lay out the two subviews we're going to have in here. I'm also going to create a view model, which is associated to this, which is action label item, or action label view, view model. Now this is going to have two things. So we're going to have a text like that, and we'll also have an action title like that. And this function, rather this view model, will get added to a function on here, which is going to be configure with view model, just like that. And we now want the two subviews on here. So we will say private let label. This is a UI label. And this is going to be a label. Once again, a UI label. Go ahead and return it. And we'll say label.text alignment will be centered. Label.number of lines is going to be 0. So it line wraps, pretty simple. And we also want a button. And I guess instead of copy and pasting it, let me just go ahead and create it. We'll say button is a UI button like that. And button is a UI button once more. We're going to return the button here. We're going to say button set title color is going to be link, which is like a bluish color, like a link style color, hence the name. We want to go ahead and add both of these as subviews. So we're going to say add subview button, add subview label. We also want a action tied to this button. So we're going to add a target. We're going to give it a selector for an action, which will be did tap button. And this next one will be touch up inside. Now you probably guessed it, we're going to use a delegate to delegate out this button tap from the view back to the controller. So we're going to come up here and we're going to come up here and create a protocol for this. So we'll say public protocol, the name of the view suffixed by delegate. It'll be any object. And we're going to go ahead and call this action label view did tap button. And this will be action view, passing in the reference. This is just a common naming standard, if I haven't called it out already, where the prefix of the function is really just the view that's calling it. You could, in theory, call it whatever the heck you want. It'll still work, of course, but having good naming convention is pretty important. So we'll hold the delegate with the weak reference. And in this selector, we can now say delegates and call that function, passing in self. We want to go ahead and lay everything out now. And we're also going to want to assign the label's text to be viewModel.text, and the button, we're going to set its title to be viewModel.actionTitle for the normal state. Pretty good. Let's see, this should be set title, not color. Let me get rid of color there. Everything will syntax highlight. And now let's go ahead and lay all of this stuff out. Now, I know I'm going through this fairly quickly, and my reasoning is it's kind of redundant at this point. Hopefully you guys have a good idea of how this stuff works. All right, so there is our button. Our button will be at the bottom of the view, and the top part will basically just be space reserved for our label. So we'll say width is width, height is height, subtracting, let's say 45. And let's go ahead and use this view. So we are going to go back to our library playlist controller, and we want to hold an instance of this on the controller. So I'm going to say private let no playlists view is going to be this type of view. We're going to configure it first and foremost in our API caller, rather in our view did load. But the other thing I just realized, we probably want this to be hidden by default. So in the initializer, we'll say is hidden is true. And up here, what we're going to say at the top of view did load is we'll say, for this view, go ahead and configure it with a action label view model. And this is going to be with text and an action title. Action title will be create, and the text will be, you don't have any playlists yet. Pretty simple. And we don't want to forget to give this a frame because that's important. So we want to override view did layout subviews, which it looks like we don't have yet. All right, view did layout subviews. And this is basically going to be just a square in the center of the view. So we'll say cg rect is 0, 0, maybe 160 or 150 by 150. And you can go ahead and say for this view, its center is view.center. And finally, if playlist is empty, you can say no playlist view is hidden is false. So I know I just spoke at 200 minutes a second or 200 words a second, but hopefully that all made sense. It looks like we have an error, so I definitely broke something along the way. Let's see what it was. All right, looks like we have a function here that is yelling at me because method cannot be declared public because the view isn't public, so we can just drop public on the protocol. Basically, it wanted this class to be public as well. So let's come back here and see what we get. So we should call the API. We should be showing that view now, but we don't see it, which is not good. So let's see what got messed up. I'm going to say background color is going to be red, because we definitely should not have any playlists when we come to this. So we might actually be going into the failure case. It does not look like we are. So let me go back to this, and we are going to add a breakpoint inside of playlist is empty. Go ahead and give this a run, and let's see if we ever end up there. Looks like we do end up there, but we still don't see our content. So I wonder if our frame is incorrect. So I'm going to get rid of this center business because we're using child controllers, so it might be calculating it wrong. Let's go ahead and try that again. We should see our red view somewhere, but I'm not seeing it. So we're saying is hidden is false. So we're going to debug this together. So we created a view. Oh, we never added it as a subview. Duh, that makes sense. We need to go ahead and add this as a subview. Totally my mistake. And it's hidden by default, which makes sense. So we're going to say we once again want this to be into the center of the view. And let's go ahead and see if we see our view now. All right, boom, there is our red view. We've got a create button and the actual text there as well. Let me go back to that view and get rid of the red color. And I'm also going to change the text color of the label. So for the label here, let's make it a little bit of a lighter color. So I'm going to say it is secondary label. Let's see, this should be text color, not text. And this will be secondary label. And let's get rid of this red color. Go ahead and give it a run. And we should start seeing our that label pop up with the button. Boom, looking great. So now what we want to do is actually let the user, tap on this create and go ahead and, see some UI to insert a title for this playlist. So let's go ahead and add a delegate for this view because we did actually define one, but we're not actually conforming to it. So I'm going to actually line break all of this first and foremost. And I'm also going to come here and say, we'll say set up no playlists view. And I'm going to make that its own function right down here. We'll say private func set up no playlists view. Hopefully I don't have any typos in there. And let's also move this API caller stuff to its own function. Let's see if I have an issue here. This looks to be spelled correctly. Let's just copy and paste that for sanity's sake and not pass in a 0. I'm also going to make this its own function. We'll say fetch data. You probably want to call it fetch playlist is probably a more appropriate name, but we're going to be lazy today. We'll say fetch data. Go ahead and paste that on in. So now we're breaking everything out. And pretty quickly, you'll start to realize why we use child controllers because this controller is already getting pretty large and we want to keep things nice and nimble and small. So let's go ahead and then set up for that view, for that no playlist view. We're also going to say the delegate is self. That way we can actually get the create button call. So we're going to go ahead and add an extension here. It's going to be action label view. What we want is the delegate. And there's only one function in here for the action label view, which is did tap a button. And this is where we want to allow show creation UI for a playlist. Let's go back to the documentation here. And we want to find the API call where you can create a playlist. And I just want to see what parameters it wants. So looks like this is a post call. Looks good. And we need to pass in the user's user ID for the playlist, which is interesting. And after we do that, we also need a body. So let's see what it wants. So it wants a authorization header. It does not want a content type. It's optional. It wants a user ID as a path parameter. And let's see, it also wants a name, which I'm not surprised by, as a JSON body parameter. That makes sense. It wants to know if it's public, which is optional. It looks like name is the only thing that it wants. So let's go ahead and take care of this here. So what I'm going to show is a alert, which is going to have a single text field to enter in the playlist name. So let's go ahead and create that here. All right, UI alert controller. It's going to have a title of new playlist. And the message will be enter playlist name, I guess. Let me go ahead and line break this. We'll say enter playlist name. And the style is going to be an alert. And we want to actually add a text field to this alert. So you guessed it, we're going to say add text field. And this gives us a configuration handler where we can actually, stylize the text field. We're not going to stylize it too much. I'm just going to enter in a placeholder. We'll say enter, we'll just say playlist rather, ... We also want to, of course, go ahead and show this alert. So we're going to say present alert animated true. And we want two buttons in this alert, one to create and one to cancel. So first, we're going to add an action for a UI alert action with a title of cancel, a style of cancel, and handler is going to be nil. I'm going to copy and paste that. And the next one is going to be a default style with a name of create. And we want a handler here, which is _in closure. And we first want to get the actual playlist, rather not playlist, the actual text field out. So I'm going to say guard let field is alert dot text fields dot first. Then we're going to get the text out of that text field. So we'll say text is field dot text. And then I'm going to validate that the text is not empty. So we're going to say text trimming characters in set for white spaces is not empty. And the reason we're trimming is because if the user just adds a bunch of spaces and tabs, that's not really a valid name that the API is going to accept. And now what we can go ahead and do is we can say API caller shared. We're going to say create a playlist with the name of text, and completion here will be a Boolean, which is going to give us success. And we are going to say if success, go ahead and refresh list of playlists. Otherwise, we are going to print out failed to create playlist. Pretty simple. Now we still need to implement this function. So let's see what we want to do in here. I'm going to command click into it and jump to definition. And what we probably want to do, let me go back here and take a look at this. We have the name already, which makes our life easy, but the annoying thing here is we need to first get the user ID for the current user, which is on the profile. So it's a little redundant. So what I'm going to do is, let me first copy this whole thing. What we first want to do in here is actually get the current user profile, because that profile object actually has the user's ID. And we have this defined up above. We did it in one of the very first videos. We're going to switch on results here. And in the success case, we are going to have a profile object. And the failure case, we're going to have an error. And I did these backwards. This should be success, just like that. And we'll go ahead and print out the error should something go wrong. All right, looking good. And let's see. So now that we have the profile in here, we can go ahead and create the URL. This API call is a little different. So we'll say URL string is going to be constants, base API URL, and I'm going to paste in what I copied. And we want to put the user's ID in here. So we're going to say this is on the profile model that we get back. All right, which should be this guy. And let's see, I spelled it correctly, looks good. From the profile, we should be able to get their ID, which is right there. And this will be the URL. So now we can actually do the same thing we do for the other API calls, which is go ahead and create a playlist. Now, one thing that we want to be careful about is not causing a memory leak. So we're going to say weak self, and we can now say self dot create request, create request. This request is going to be a post request. Well, this first thing is a URL, so we'll say URL string. The type is going to be post, and the completion will give you a closure with the request back. I'm going to go ahead and see if I can get away with the trailing closure here. All right, we're going to say request in. And let me just say Command B to make sure that everything is still compiling, which it should be. Yep, it is. Beautiful. Now what we can do is create a task with this request. We'll say shared. And we want to go ahead and create a request with a request. Completion is going to have data. It's going to have an underscore and an error. And here we are going to say guard let data equals data. Error is nil. Otherwise, we're going to return. And you guys know the drill at this point. We're going to try to get the JSON out. We're going to say try to serialize the JSON with the data that we get back, allowing fragments. And if something fails, we're going to go ahead and first say completion is false. And we are also going to print out what the heck went wrong. So we'll print out error.localized description. And let's see, this one completion is also false. Keep in mind, this completion is for the root function signature. So this one right here, but we actually tell the caller if we successfully created a playlist or not. We want to also say task.resume here. Now we do need to specify the name as a body parameter. So I'm going to change this to be base request. And we are going to copy this to a mutable property. We'll say request is our base request. And we're going to set the HTTP body, which we are going to take a dictionary and convert it into data for. So let's see what this actually wants. This wants a, let's see, JSON body with a name, which points to the name for our playlist. So the way we can do this is by creating, first and foremost, a dictionary. We'll say name is going to be name, which is a parameter. And we want to get data for this. So let's see, we can say, we can convert this to data pretty simply. And the way that we do that is by basically creating our structure here. And we want to actually basically use what we do in the JSON serialization here, but the opposite of it. So we're going to say, first, let's create the JSON up here. And we are going to say JSON serialization. And we want to get the data from the JSON object now, which is the inverse of what we do down below, where we pass in a dictionary here, which is our JSON. And let's see, the second parameter here is any options that we want. So I guess we can say allowing fragments. It's really not really relevant if we add that or not, but this call can throw. So we want to go ahead and say try optional. That way, if it throws, it'll just be nil. So now that we've done that, we can go ahead and let's print out the response that we get back from this JSON. I'm going to call this results so it doesn't conflict with the JSON up above. So there is results. Go ahead and hit Command B, and let's see what the expected response here is. Looks like it gives us a result back of the playlist. All right, and it looks like it is looks like it just gives us the given playlist back, which makes sense. So I'm going to go ahead and assume that we're going to want to decode a JSON, but before we rather decode a playlist from the JSON, but before we do that, let's go ahead and give this a run. We're going to hit this button to get our alert. If you don't see your simulator keyboard, what you can do is come up here and go to IO, keyboard, and toggle software keyboard. And we're going to create a playlist. So we're going to create a playlist called iOS Academy is Great. And we're going to go ahead and hit create here. And let's see what the heck happens. So we're not actually printing anything, which is either very good or very bad. So we're saying create playlist. We should have been coming in here and I should have added print statements. So let me print out URL string. Let me also print out, let's see, starting creation. And here we printed out the result that we get. In this case, we're printing out the error. So we should get something being printed out. Let's go ahead and create this again, or run this again rather, and let's see what happens. So we should still be getting this if it failed, which it looks like it did. So let's create a playlist called dog. We're going to hit create, and it looks like we got the result back here, but it looks like there is a weird curly inside the URL, and that seems to be a typo. Let me double check. Yep, that's a typo. Get rid of that curly before interpolation. And I'm also going to print out here. We're going to tweak this print to created, and we're going to drop in results. Try that one more time. Go ahead and hit Command R to build and run, and hopefully everything should be successfully created now. So we're going to say create a new playlist. iOS Academy is great. Go ahead and hit create, and there is our JSON. It has successfully created a playlist. So it's pretty awesome. So what we'll do here is, now that we know we need to decode a playlist, let's try that one more time, but with JSON decoder. We want to decode a playlist from the data. And what we will go ahead and do is we will print out, we're already printing out the results, but we will now say here completion is true. And I'm going to run this and create one more playlist and make sure it works. And then we'll update the UI. So we don't actually see that, that middle UI now because we are actually getting a playlist back. So we want to add a plus button up here. So what we'll do is actually jump to library view controller. And what I'm going to do is in view to load, keep in mind, this is not the playlist one, or rather, if it is, you don't want this one. You want, let's see, library view controller. We want to add a bar button item at the top right if the user is on playlists. If they're on albums, we're going to get rid of it. So what we'll say here in viewed load is we will say update bar buttons. And I'm going to go ahead and create this function right here. We'll say private func update bar buttons. And let's see, what we will say here is if toggle view dot state, or we can actually switch on this probably. All right, we're going to say switch on toggle view dot state. In the playlist state, we're going to show a plus button, but in the album state, we're not going to do that. So for this, what we'll say is navigation item dot right bar button item is a UI bar button item. And this is going to be a style of add, a target of self, and a selector of did tap add. We'll create this in a second. In the album case, we're just going to say that the right bar button item is nil, so we get rid of the plus. Let's create that selector right here. And what we're basically going to do here in the selector is we're going to say playlist VC, and we want to go ahead and call the function that's going to show the alert. And let's go back to our library playlist controller. And let's see what I called it. I think it was a part of a delegate call. So what we'll do at the bottom here is instead of doing this alert creation stuff, we'll say show create playlist alert. And this is going to be a public function on here called what we just typed, show create playlist alert. And let's see, we're going to paste all that code in here really quickly. And let's make sure I spelled that correctly. So this one is just calling up to the other function. And now on this other controller, we can say playlist VC, show create playlist alert, pretty simple. But the one thing we want to do is actually call this update bar button items function whenever the toggle changes, the toggle being this thingy up here, or when the user swipes between the screens as well. So we will update it in this case, in our scroll view did scroll, as well as that else case. We're also going to update it here and here. So go ahead and hit Command R, and let's see if we get that plus button again. All right. All right, cool. So we have a plus button. If I tap on this, it disappears. And if I swipe to this, it disappears. If I swipe back, it reappears. And if I tap it, we should get the alert to create a new playlist. I'm going to say this is another cool playlist. And I'm not going to add an exclamation mark in case those symbols are not allowed. We're going to hit create, and we, looks like, failed to create. The data couldn't be read. Interesting. So let's go back to our API caller. And it looks like we actually don't want to serialize to a playlist. So what I'll do here is we'll just go and serialize back to the original JSON object. And what we'll do is we'll cheat a little bit. And what I'm going to do in here is say in this JSON object, if we have a ID, we'll say it succeeded. And if it doesn't have an ID, we'll go ahead and say that it failed. So this result here should be a, let's see what the type of it is. It should be any at the moment. So I'm going to say if let, we'll say if let ID is results as a dictionary of string any, or let me rather say if let response is our results as a dictionary, and response ID as a string doesn't equal nil, then we know that the creation succeeded. Then we can say completion here is true. Otherwise, we are going to say completion is false. And the only reason I'm doing this here instead of JSON decoder is because we don't need to hand back a model. We basically only care if we got a response, which is sufficient. So this is the only case where I would actually do something like this, because it's not really the best practice. But what we'll do here is I will print out created, And this one will be fail to get ID. Let's go ahead and try that for the third time, and hopefully it works. This video's gotten kind of long, so in the next one we might do the UI for actually, showing those playlists here. Let's go ahead and create something, and this is going to be another awesome playlist. We'll go ahead and print it out, and we get successfully created, which is pretty great. And let's see, let's actually make the table here. We'll do adding songs in the next video. So let's do library playlist view controller. And we want a table view here. And if you recall, we already have a custom cell and everything for it set up because it's the same table that we're using in the search results here. I'm just going to copy this. If I find the playlist section somewhere in here, I'm going to copy the same table view cell and just use it here. And I think we called it something like subtitle cell. So let's go ahead and create a instance for a table view here. So we'll say table view is a UI table view. Pretty simple. We are going to say this table view has those cells registered. So we'll say table view is a table view. Go ahead and return it. Autocomplete just can't keep up today. We're going to register a, what did I call it? Subtitle cell, something like that. Search result subtitle table view cell, even though this isn't a search results. You might want to go and rename the cell later on, but we're just going to stick with it. And let's see, we are also going to say the table view is hidden by default. Very similar to the other view that we have up here for the no playlists. We're only going to unhide it if the playlist response is not empty. We'll say delegate is self. I will say data source is self as well. We also want to not forget to add this as a sub view. Pretty simple. And we want to conform to the protocol function. So I'm going to add an extension here. And we are going to conform to UI table view delegate and UI table view data source. And there are two functions that are required. Number of rows, which is going to be return playlist.count, which is what we get back from the API. And the other one is cell for row at index path, where we'll go ahead and dequeue out one of those subtitle cells. So we're going to dequeue a reusable cell with an identifier and index path. This will be our subtitle table view cell dot identifier. We're going to want to cast this as the appropriate cell so we can configure it with a view model. So we'll cast it. Otherwise, we're going to return a vanilla UI table view cell, return cell. This needs to be a guard let now because we're casting it optionally. And finally, cell.configure with the cell type view model. And this gets created with a title, a subtitle, and an image. So what we can do is first and foremost up here, let's get to the nth playlist that we're working with, which is playlist, which will be playlists, plural, index path.row. That'll give us the playlist at the given position. And from that, we can go ahead and extract out all this data. The name will be playlist.name. All right. The subtitle will be playlist.owner.displayname. And the image URL here will be the image for this playlist, but let me just line break it first. This is going to be playlist.images, or rather, let's see, what else is on here? Playlist. Let's see, we have a playlist. It should have an images on it. We did plural. We want playlist.images.first.url. Now this type is a string, so we need to remember to cast it in the URL constructor and coalesce it to a default empty string. And let's see why this is yelling at me, because I spelled else incorrectly as per usual. Go ahead and hit Command R one more time. And let's see if we see our playlists here, which we don't. Why don't we see them? The reason we don't see them is because in the function for update UI, we never implemented this. We want to say table view reload data. And we also want to say table view is hidden, not editing. We want to say is hidden is false. And we want to say no playlists view is hidden is true. And we also want to say up here, the table view, if we are showing the no playlist, we want to say is hidden is true. So go ahead and give that a run, and let's see if we can see our playlists that we're fetching. So we come in here and we don't see our playlist, and it's probably because I forgot to add a frame, which I in fact did. So we'll say the frame here is view.bounds. Hopefully that's the last thing I forgot here. Go ahead and run it one more time. All right, and there is our list of playlists. We don't have a actual image for it yet because we haven't added any tracks, which is why we don't see any image there. So what I'm going to go ahead and actually do is we'll jump into this particular function. And let's see, that's not what we want. We'll jump into the particular configure function. And what I'll say is this set image with a URL, we'll have a placeholder in here for it where you can specify, what image to show in case there isn't one. I will say the system name for this will be photo. And I'm also going to go back and we're going to change the style of this table view to be grouped so we get a nicer background color. That way I don't have to mess with the cell. We'll say frame and style here. So frame of 0, and the style will be grouped. Go ahead and give it a run once more, and let's see if it looks a little nicer. All right, starting to look much nicer. The cells look a little cramped. So I'm going to also change the height of it, and then I'm going to wrap up this video because it's much longer than I thought. Let's see, height for row at index path, and we will return, let's do 70, and let's see what that looks. If that's too much, we can always bring it back down to something like 60. But okay, it's a little large. I think we'll keep it though. It doesn't look too bad. But if you tap on this, nothing actually happens now. And we'll go ahead and do that in the video after this, as well as adding songs to your playlist. So that was setting up a lot of the playlist stuff. If you enjoyed the video, definitely go ahead and give it a like down below. Comment any questions, issues, subscribe to the channel. Let me go ahead and just do one more here to make sure it works. You can go ahead and create it. And actually one thing that we didn't do, I keep making this video longer and longer, is if we successfully create it, what we will do here is we'll say self dot update UI. Or actually, we don't want to update the UI. We want to fetch data actually again, because we have added a new playlist. This will be the last thing I do. Let's try this once more. So when we add a playlist, it should auto fetch the data again and refresh our list here. So I'm going to go ahead and create one more, and this is our last playlist. We'll go ahead and add it, and boom, there is our last playlist. So that's it for this one. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.